Ratermann. Wir schätzen es sehr, dass Sie sich die Zeit heute genommen haben und wir freuen uns, Sie auch in Zukunft bei uns begrüßen zu dürfen. Ich übergebe jetzt das Wort an Professorin Teresa Beck, die die Keynote von Professor Bonilla-Silva einleiten wird.
Yeah. When preparing this talk, I remembered that at the time when Twitter was still a place where you could find wholesome content, I read a thread about the importance of the term guys as a gender-inclusive form to address an audience. And I thought that I will start by saying, good afternoon, guys. Yeah, as it has been already said, my name is Teresa Beck. I'm a sociology professor at Helmut-Schmidt-Universität in Hamburg, and I'm an associate member of the research network. And it is my great pleasure, and I also have to say an honor today to be here with all of you, and also to welcome on the podium in a moment one of the eminent and prolific and provocative, in the best sense of the word, scholars in the US in the sociology of race, Professor Eduardo Bonilla-Silva. He will deliver the keynote speech. You see it already here on the screen, in plain sight, the not-so-secret way racism works in universities in the USA. The talk will focus mainly, but not exclusively, on the US, but as we sit here, we all know that this topic is also of relevance in Germany and in other countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world. I have been working in academia now for almost 20 years, and the speakers lists like the one for this conference, audiences like the one assembled here with so many non-white faces and names that I also have to ask pronunciation before I try to pronounce them on stage. This is still rather the exception. And this exception only produces in particular fields of research, as it has already been mentioned earlier this afternoon, typically in fields that address problems of racialization or exclusions, or in fields which focus on regions that are inhabited by non-white folks. I have to say that standing here today, I feel emotionally somewhat between like very humble, but also close to imposter syndrome, because race and racism was, in my own academic career, for most of the time, a topic that I always avoided. I grew up in Eastern Germany in the 1990s, and I guess many of you know what this meant. And this was like just one gaping wound, and where in all other topics I am the kind of German sociologist that feels like competent to talk about basically everything. This was the one topic I never wanted to touch. And then somehow developments pushed me to face it, but first in different, not in Germany, but in other parts of the world. So being here today, I feel really, really grateful and also very humble and really grateful for all the people who to me were so much more courageous, who opened the space for this kind of research, who held open the space into which I feel I can now also step to participate or join a discussion at this late stage in my life. So I can only repeat congratulations for what you have achieved. But maybe coming from a different field that is not racism research itself, I feel there are still a few thoughts that I want to contribute. So my own expertise developed outside of the sphere of racism studies. I study societies in war and in crisis, also ethnographically. And for me, the present of the colonial and imperial history and the ongoing processes of racialization that shape social orders from the local level to the global sphere, all this is an ubiquitous factor in all of my research. But while this is clear to me, and I guess to most people here in the room, I have spent most of my academic career in spaces where these very obvious realities did not only need to be explained over and over again, but where they were challenged all the time and had to be defended. So the presence of the colonial history in contemporary society, to most of the colleagues I interacted, was not something very obvious, but something, a factor of irritation and something that needed, justification as an argument. So against this background, I cannot thank enough the organizers to actually invite Professor Bonilla-Silva for this talk on the role of racism in the academic system. A stronger presence of racialized people, of non-white people in spaces of research is more than a matter of democratic participation. What is at stake here are not only questions of social justice or inequality. It is the composition of the personnel in universities and in spaces of research needs to change because it's the only way to impose the epistemic injustice that is inscribed into our knowledge systems, into the structures of higher education until this day. So the exclusion of people goes hand in hand with the exclusion of topics and of research perspective. In short, the exclusion of people produces bad scholarship. And this is what has been going on and is continuing to go on for quite a while. Debates on climate change are a very good example. Oh my God, the world is ending. Well, folks, for many people in the world, their world's already ended. And for some of them, more than once in their lives. And I studied societies in war and experienced how difficult it is to communicate these research topics to people who just know war from TV. And having more and diverse experience in our research spaces, this can truly change our knowledge system. So therefore, it's amazing to have you here, Professor Bonilla-Silva. And the lecture will be about 40 minutes in time, and then we will have a brief conversation, the two of us on stage, and then we will quickly open towards your questions. Before we do this, somewhat ceremonially, the necessary biographical data for those of you who don't know this already to better situate our speaker. You can also find this, by the way, in the program. So Professor Eduardo Bonilla-Silva is the James B. Duke Distinguished Professor of Sociology at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. After his PhD at the University of Wisconsin in 1993, he worked at the University of Michigan and at Texas A&M University. He has been at Duke University already since 2005, and he first made waves in the discipline with an article published in 1997 in the American Sociological Review, Rethinking Racism Towards a Structural Interpretation. And in this text, now this is common knowledge, he proposed to study racial matters, not in terms of individual behaviors, but in terms of structure. Already a modern classic is the book he published first in 2003, Racism Without Racists, and this, is currently already in its 6th edition. Currently, he is working simultaneously on a number of problems and questions, among them the role of racism in family research or the mechanics of racial domination, but also how to best frame microaggressions theoretically, and why people in Latin America do not see crude visual expressions of racism as racist. And now, without further ado, I welcome you on stage, Professor Bonilla-Silva.
Don't clap too much, you may not like what I have to say. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yes. Okay, so you're alive. Okay. Barely, okay. So how many of you have had that dream that you are naked? And psychologists tell you that that means that you are insecure, etc. Okay, sometimes you are really naked. So I write my presentations in paper. I'm old-fashioned. And guess what happened? I forgot them in the hotel. But don't worry. I'm a sociologist, and we have this thing called the sociological imagination. And it better come in handy today, because I'm going to begin with notes, and at some point, we have a secret agent going and trying to get my notes, hopefully in time before I finish. So let me begin by thanking Roman, Aisha, Director Naika, and Noah for inviting me to this institute and to participate in this inaugural conference of WinRa. So it's really an honor for me to be here before you. And I'm delighted to be back in Europe, which in many ways reminds me of Puerto Rico, the place I grew up. The weather, people, and culture are actually quite different, but the racial formations are similar. We all deny having a systemic racial problem, argue we are cosmopolitan nations, yeah? And even though we clearly treat immigrants and our own people of color as second-class citizens, we proclaim like Pangloss that we live in the best of all possible worlds. Germans, for example, admit to the Holocaust and the Nazi moment, but in a way that prevents them from understanding that the racism did not begin with Hitler. And let me see if I am, wow, my age, absolutely impressive. Thank you, Agent. I owe you. Oh. Oh, where is my, I have a, was that cool or not? Okay. Anyway, let me see if I catch where I was. So again, the racism in Germany did not begin with Hitler, and certainly did not end after World War II. Therefore, and not surprisingly, an important segment of the intelligentsia, politicians, and the masses in Europe believe that talking about systemic racism is racist. And as Pierre-André Taguieff has argued recently, some of you know his work, and I cited him in the past, never again. And of course, he's not alone in this belief, yeah? They believe that CRT, critical race theory, and systemic racism discourse and analysis is anti-white. My talk today is titled, In Plain Sight, the Not-So-Secret Way Racism Works in Universities in the USA, and I want to make clear two things before I commence. First, although my empirical case study is mostly the USA, the theory and arguments I advance about the racialization of organizations, today I'm focusing on universities, but this can be neighborhoods, it can be hospitals, etc. So again, such as university applies everywhere, including Germany. So I hope that in the presentation and the discussion, we begin thinking about, oh, this is like at Hamburg, yeah, or other universities. Second, the in plain sight part in the title refers to the fact that I believe racialization, that Omi and Winan defined years ago as the extension of racial meaning to categories or practices, yeah? So racialization in organizations fundamentally is about things that happen they don't happen in hidden room or by people with master plans. But by racially habituated, you're going to learn a concept today, RWF. I'm way ahead. There was, okay. So RWF, regular white folks. You never heard that concept? Yeah. It's very important because in the discourse on race, we assume that the races are certain people in the polity. I'm going to say no system of domination can work based on a few people. It's most people. And I'm going to articulate why I think this happens. And you are going to see a lot of drawings because that's me. I do drawings, and they're not great, but they work for me. And in this drawing, you see me in the corner because that's what happens in these so-called integrated settings. We are in the same space, but we have corners, yeah? And I'm going to talk now specifically about universities. To make my case, I will use, in case some of you are not familiar, elements of my body of work over the last 30 years. Yeah, I've been a professor for 30 years. First, I will outline theoretically. I think we have to begin at the beginning by discussing this thing that we call racism. And I think that the common sense view, which we social scientists have translated into a supposedly more sophisticated theoretical outline, is problematic. So I'm going to begin with that. Second, I will describe I'm already, what's going on? Wow. I needed, okay, something happened. So there was supposed to be a slide with all the points, so I'm going to ignore that. Second, I will describe the specific ways the sociological imagination is not working too well today. So second, I will describe the specific ways the post-civil rights racial regime in the US operates, and I name it, yeah? I call it the new racism. And I think it's important for us to understand that we have slavery, we have Jim Crow, and after the civil rights movement, arguably, at least I argue, a new regime emerged. Third, albeit the racial ideological spectrum of any racial formation is always complex. A hegemonic ideology is usually in place. In the US, that hegemonic racial ideology is what I call colorblind racism. And I believe that both my argument about the new structure, the new racism I talk about, as well as my argument about the ideology of colorblindness will be remarkably familiar to some of you. And I hope you begin making the connection. Oh, that's like in Germany, yeah? Fourth, I will spend some time explaining and describing HWCUs, historically white colleges and universities. And some of you know the term PWIs, predominantly white institutions. I'm going to make an argument that this term is better. The other one is based on demography. My argument is based on power relations. So you could have a university where the proportion people of color is high and still be an HWCU. And lastly, I will conclude my talk with some observations that apply to HWCUs in the US as well as in Europe, and suggest the politics necessary to address normative racism in both. So historically, my work is not about the extremes, but about the everyday, mundane, normative, because that, I think, is where power resides, yeah? So now I think I'm good. So what is racism? For too long, social scientists have subscribed to a common sense, simplistic definition of racism, and we have argued that racism is the Klan, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and here you have a picture of neo-Nazis in Germany and in the US, or the nasty, rotten apples, yeah? And please, it took me a long time to do that little worm, so I'm finding the perfect color, yeah? This view, which we call the prejudice approach, is limited and limiting. First, as I argued almost 30 years ago, by focusing on individuals and their attitudes, this perspective misses the collective character of racial affairs. Fundamental that we understand it's not a matter of a few people, but it's societal, it's collective. Second, it regards racism as the original sin. We have racism in the US because we had slavery. Or, in the case of Germany, we have racism because of the Nazi moment. But thankfully, that's over, and we are now beyond. Whereas I was joking yesterday, we are so we are post-racism, yeah? And I'm going to argue that a good analysis of racism needs to understand that it may have begun at a particular moment, but as a system, it has changed. Yeah? Slavery was different from Jim Crow, which is different from the new racism that I'm going to describe quickly soon. Third, by focusing attention on the overt actions of some actors in the system, this mainstream conceptualization neglects covert, unconscious, and habituated ways in which racialized behavior happens. So if you are a black professor, and you think how many times have you been called nasty names in the academy, probably you say yes twice or once in my 30 years. But if you think how many times have been treated as a second-class scholar, have been minimized, have been told, you are making more money than me, how can you account for that? I'm like, easy, I'm better than you. Simple, yeah? Fourth, it frames racial affairs in moralistic terms, which overlooks the fundamental reason racism exists. Racism is in place, my friends, not because some people are bad or immoral. I happen to believe that racism is unethical and immoral, but the system is not in place because we have bad people with bad intentions, but because the system benefits some people, yeah? And therefore, they develop a material interest in keeping the racial order in place. Hence, a good structural theory of racism, if this moves, must take the collective nature of racism seriously. Second, be historical. So I'm talking about the US, but I'm conscious that if I think about Germany or Puerto Rico, I have to calibrate my analysis to the specificity of your racial formation. And third, it has to be materialist. The systems of domination, whether it's class, capitalism or patriarchy or racism, are in place because they have a material foundation. Now, in recent work, I have theorized about individuals as social subjects, the multiple factors shaping their subjectivity. One is not just a racial subject. Yeah? You are also a gender subject, a class subject, a sexual subject, and all those things affect your politics and outlook. Yeah? And I also have talked about the racial structure of society and how it's produced and reproduced, because I believe that most structural theories of racism have made the structure into a ghost. That also took me a long time, so I appreciate that. Okay. Into something that affects everything, but like God, works in mysterious ways. The mystery of how the structure works disappears if we take seriously the fact that regular white folks, and I Google regular white family, that's the picture I came, yeah? So the algorithm of Google is also problematic, yeah? And researchers on algorithms know that AI, et cetera, is not beyond race, okay. Anyway, so these RWF are shaped by what I call in my work the white habitus. And that white habitus affects whites from birth to death. And later on we can discuss what do you mean by white habitus, yeah? So this white habitus trains whites into the habits of whiteness, yeah? Cognitively, aesthetically, and even emotionally. I now turn my attention briefly to the central characteristics of the new racism. Most of us recognize that the end of Jim Crow was not the end of systemic racism, but we have had a tough time, and as an analyst, but also a scholar activist, I am somewhat angry that we failed collectively after the civil rights movement not to name the new smiling monster that we're facing. Because it's easier to battle something that you have a name, yeah? At this point, it's like we have no name, yeah? So I believe it's vital to name and characterize systems of domination, as otherwise we talk about systemic racism like Biden, Kamala, Hillary, and Bernie do. They use the term to signify, I am woke, I know the term, but they really don't know nothing about anything, yeah? And when you push, they really use systemic racism, but they're talking back to bad apples, yeah? They use the term, but they don't know, and are unwilling to address the deep implications of claiming that racism is systemic or structural. For at least 25 years, I have argued that a new regime emerged, and again, I call it the new racism, and that I argue that that system structures most racial action in the polity, meaning that not all, yeah? There are elements of the polity that are structured by old-fashioned stuff, yeah? Nothing new for all structuralists in the room. Systems of domination are always articulated. The main characteristics of this system are, first, discrimination tends to be covert and indirect. In stores, we are murdered with racist politeness. May I help you? May I help you? Mary, I know you don't like this example, so I'm going to use a different one. Like I go to a store, and I'm going to pay with, back in the day, we used to pay with these things called checks, yeah? And you're supposed to provide a picture ID. I do my picture ID. Say, you have another picture ID? I'm like, gee, I have another one. You have another one. I'm like, so I told the story to one of my students, and he didn't believe me. He was one of my white students. I don't believe that. And he called the supermarket. And they told him, the policy is that we allowed the clerks to use their sense of things to decide when to ask for IDs. Their sense of things. Meaning what? This guy looks suspicious because he's black and he sounds Latino. He may be a foreigner. He may be something, but he's not a regular person, yeah? Definitely not an RWF. Second, direct racial terms are avoided in public interactions. And whites have developed careful ways about talking about blacks and people of color without naming them as blacks or people of color. So you can say, I love urban clothing. I love streetwear. I'm like, what's that? By the way, black designers are mad because whenever you call it streetwear, you get less money as a designer. So you get like the black tax. Yeah? Third, the racial agenda and the political agenda also tends to avoid directness, which has led to new terminologies such as welfare reform. In the US, welfare reform has been coded as black people. These are the welfare people, yeah? Or inner city problems. That's black people problems, yeah? And in the academy, rather than saying, oh, we have a black Puerto Rican professor in Duke sociology, they say, we have a diverse hire. That's what they call me. You're a diverse person. I'm like, thank you. Do I get extra money for being a diverse person? Because I'll take it. I'll criticize it. I'll joke about it, but I want my money, yeah? Okay. Fourth, many of the exclusionary techniques as well as social control practices have become invisible to whites. So an example of the former is the exams such as the graduate record examination. I'm assuming you have also a similar an entrance exam. And these exams are biased against folks of color because they're based on white norms of knowledge, yeah? Beethoven is to Mozart like, what? I don't listen to it. And but again, the funny thing is these tests are regarded as objective, even though the data shows predict quite little about success in college. And an example of the latter is that police surveillance and brutality against people of color. That one sounds strange because today we know that we see the videos. But before the videos, we didn't, yeah? And it was this particular case, some of you of a certain age remember, yeah? I forgot, what was his name? Mary, what was his name? Rodney King, no? So that was the first time, and that was before cell phone technology. That was a person filming with these things that have disappeared. We used to film with a camera, yeah? Now everybody, camera, I have my cell phone, yeah? Of course, I want all of us to continue filming, but be aware that filming has not changed the fundamentals. black and brown people are still brutalized, which tells you the resilience of systemic domination. Even with the fact that people should be concerned about, hey, someone is filming you, you may go to trial and be convicted, which used not to happen, but lately, the murderer of George Floyd was convicted. Yeah? Lastly, all practices such as redlining have been retooled. A more covert version of redlining is in place, and the large studies, for example, this study shows that it still happens in 61 metro cities in the US. Some of you don't know what is redlining. Let me show you. In the 1930s, the federal government developed these maps, presumably to save, to make things, to stabilize housing markets. The problem was that what it did was areas where black folks live were viewed as red, that is danger, 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 and it meant that banks would not lend or provide black prospective folks trying to get a loan, saying, okay, your loan is going to be twice as expensive, yeah? So to be clear, I must add one important caveat. I'm saying that the bulk of racial interactions in the nation are of the new racing variety. However, I'm not blind and recognize that the Klan, Proud Boys, Boogaloo Boys, Oath Keepers, and other more traditionally racist groups and people are still out there, and in fact, since the Trump moment, have grown in relevance. This social fact, however, is not new, as all systems of domination coexist with other systems and forms of domination. They are, to borrow from the old structuralist, Louis Althusser, via Stuart Hall, they are articulated. And those of a certain age recognize that our current times, where everybody's like, my goodness, Trump is the president. In the 1980s, we were like, my goodness, Ronald Reagan is the president, Margaret Thatcher is the prime minister in England. This is the end of civilization as we know it, yeah? Although I now believe that Trump is more dangerous than Reagan. And some of us jokingly say, well, we miss Reagan, you know. And George W. Bush, oh my goodness. Yeah? Let me now discuss the racial ideology that co-produces the new racism. I'm changing those of you who have a little bit of Marxism in your system, and I used to be a vulgar Marxist for whom class was everything, so I still have that element in my academic and political imprint, yeah? That the traditional view is that ideologies are just superstructure, and that the structure is the fundamental. I now believe that ideology and structure are so co-determinants of social action. And I call this ideology colorblind racism. This term doesn't make sense to Germans, but when we talk, I think that you're going to find, oh, we don't call it like that, but we have a version of that, yeah? This ideology accounts for and ultimately justifies the racial status quo using the principles of liberalism in an abstract and decontextualized manner. As an ideology, it's comprised of, and I don't have time to go over that, frames, style, and racial stories. You want more on that? There is a beautiful book that sells for $39.95. Anyway. And I'm going to offer an invented example. I could have given you, as I did yesterday, an example from the book, but I decided, let me be bodacious, let me be creative. And this example is the case of Ludwig Mohr-White III, a student at Free University of Berlin. And he said, I'm not a racist, but students with migrant background are let into our universities where most are patently unqualified. I mean, we all like Mehmet, and he's one of my best friends, and he's so sweet. But you know, being nice is not sufficient. My brother did not get into FUB because they keep admitting a bunch of they are, I guess, German, but you know what I mean? Admit the best and brightest, whether they are black, white, yellow, or green. I don't know why white people keep talking about green people, but they always, yeah. What Turks and African people need to do is work hard, complain less, learn to speak proper German, and for God's sake, stop using racism as an excuse. Germany has some extremist people, but all in all, we are a wonderful nation, which is why you guys came here in the first place, yeah? So now let's deconstruct Ludwig and how he judges race matters. First, he relies heavily on what I call abstract liberalism. Hence, his discussion is formalistic and quite abstract, conveniently ignoring the effects of racism. Positive for him, the race game provides positive things for whites and negative for non-whites. Always deal with that duality, yeah? If there is a material foundation, then whites must benefit, yeah? If it's only affecting one group, it wouldn't work, yeah? So positive for him and negative for folks of color. Think about admissions exam in Germany and the discussion about whether or not they are truly good metrics to assess capacities or not. Or the fact that kids of color have a harder time getting recommendations from teachers to go to college. I did read a little bit before coming here about Germany. You're a peculiar society, like, interesting. Second, he uses stylistic elements of colorblind racism. It shows as semantic moves. He begins by saying, when someone tells you, I'm not a racist, but, that's it. That's it, yeah? Or some of my best friends are. Yeah? He also uses this rhetorical incoherence, so it's very hard to talk about race, particularly in what we call mixed company. Yeah? If you are in a group with folks of color or folks of migrant background, you're talking about this, you're going to get a little bit like, I mean, you know what I mean? And like, no, I don't understand what you're saying, you're crazy. Anyway, and lastly, he has these racial stories, for example, that his argument about my brother didn't get into FIU because you folks are taking my job. Of course, it's a racial story because we have no data. It's just he believes that, but it's like, maybe your brother was not that good. Based on what you're saying, maybe you are not either. How come you were admitted? Maybe some kind of real pro-white system is really racist, you know. Okay, so I'm supposed to have a water break. How do you like my subliminal message? I told you I'm black and Puerto Rican. I don't have time to be subliminal. I had to be by the middle of the road. Okay. In case I did, my publisher forces me to do these things. Shame on them. In case I did not make this point clear, the political beauty and danger of colorblind racism is that it helps sustain racial inequality in a smooth, seemingly non-racial way. One can even claim to be anti-racist, yet support the racial order and do so through colorblind nonsense. Yeah? I can now move to the main event, the nature of HWCUs, colleges and universities. Colleges and universities parade as universal, cosmopolitan, liberal institutions, but they have a history, a demography, a curriculum, a climate, and a set of symbols and traditions that embody, signify, and reproduce whiteness. Scholars of color, students of color, faculty of color, you know what I mean, yeah? You go to the campus and you are like, okay, where am I here? And like, okay, you are like a guest, yeah? But it shouldn't be that. You are a member of the party. You should be an equal member, but it's like they treat you like, okay, we are allowing you to be in, yeah? This is why their structure and culture reflect and reproduce whiteness. Something that I address in a paper with my former student, now doctor, That's a beautiful last name, Dr. Peoples. I love that. I was telling him, I wish I was Eduardo Bonilla-Peoples, yeah? Today, I give you just the skeleton of what we did in the paper, so if you want more, just go out and check the paper. First, the history of these places matters. HWCUs, in case you forgot, historically white colleges and universities, were established back in the day as all-white institutions and remained so until the 1960s. Most were for elites, they were male-dominated, and primarily dealt for hundreds of years with religious instruction, much like the antecedents in Europe. Yeah? All universities, that's sort of the historical foundation of universities in Europe. And when the civil rights movement struggle came to the academy's door, whites fought quite hard the desegregation of schools and colleges. This is why liberal whites' view of desegregation, the notion that if we are all together in the same space, we are like, oh, you are like me but black, so we are like the same. Yeah? That is a dream of some social scientists, but it has never been realized. Being in the same space doesn't guarantee positive interaction and good outcomes. Leaders of the civil rights movement like Martin Luther King and lawyers for the movement like Michael Middleton were clear that the fundamental goal was attaining equality of resources and opportunities. If racial integration happened along the way, fantastic. But desegregation, they learned quickly, brought neither the resources that people of color needed nor racial integration. This is why I insist that what we have today in HWCUs is spatial cohabitation. And please see me again in the corner. That's my systemic corner. In every college I have been, I'm in a corner, yeah? This is also why most people of color in HWCUs feel alienated and minimized. Where is my colleague who is doing dancing as resistance? That's why we need to find ways of fighting and resisting the alienation we experience in these spaces, yeah? It also explains the misery of white students of color and their allies. Years after so-called integration, continue fighting for resources and changes today. The picture of the right was this summer, the fight to defend affirmative action. And of course, we lost temporarily. I'm optimistic on social movements, so we'll get back to the horse. On the right, you have a movement against sort of the whiteness of the college where I studied, University of Wisconsin. Can you distinguish me in that picture? Yep, I'm that handsome fellow in the front. And I was the one who designed all the placards that people were carrying. Okay. HWCU's organizational and cultural whiteness are the driving forces behind the isolated incidents. Please notice I put in quotation mark isolated, because as a social scientist, if these things kept happening again and again and again, they cannot be just isolated. And the social scientist in me says there must be something driving these things to happen, yeah? At Duke, for example, you can see references to a few of these incidents here, but you also have to know, and you know this, that this is not just in the US, but it happens in European universities, and has been documented. There is a project out of Cambridge by Dr. Monica Moreno Figueroa and her colleagues, and they are basically asking students to tell them, anything that happened, please let us know, and we'll not only fight, but also document. We need to have data, yeah? However, the deeper way in which these places embody and reproduce whiteness is through their curriculum and how life and activities are conceptualized. On how whiteness affects curriculum, something I know you all care passionately, I wrote a book with my colleague, Tukufu Suberi, White Logic, White Methods, and on life stuff in general in colleges, I have to tell you what you probably know, that almost everything in these colleges is white-oriented, even the food. I am sick and tired in the US. Every event is chicken wrap sandwich. I'm like, how many chicken wrap sandwiches can I eat in my career? I mean, give me some hummus, give me something, give me some alternative, yeah? The symbols, culture, and traditions in HWCUs also reflect whiteness. We have white statues, for example. In the left, you have the statue of Silent Sam, Confederate soldier, and it was finally removed a few years ago by the movement. Folks went and literally took it down, yeah? The one in the middle is the statue of Venus as a symbol of beauty, and some of you may be pondering, so, well, it's white beauty. And the problem with only having one representative of beauty is that those of us who are black, Latino, Asian American, or Native American are not represented in the beauty deal. And I think we are beautiful. I think I'm handsome. I say it all the time, and I believe it. Hello? Can I have one say, yeah, thank you. I had to pay for that. Okay, whatever. And we are building after building, named after white people, making people of color feel as invisible people, as people who are out of place, as people who are like guests in the White House. So I can finally address one of the main issues that I wanted to address today, which is that all of us are racialized actors. No one can claim, not me, I'm outside, I'm beyond, I'm post, I'm just a human being. I'm like, whatever. You're a confused person, yeah? But racialization is orchestrated differently for whites and non-whites. The brush of racism has painted all of us, but differently. Whites are trained, that is painted, to rule, and people of color are placed in positions of subordination and systematically bombarded with messages and ideas about their so-called inferiority. The entire culture is filled with that. The critical issue then is this: how are whites trained into the art of racial domination? Obviously, they do not attend night school and go on like, repeat after me, I am not a racist, but, yeah, that's not the way that they learn about the whiteness stuff, yeah? So how do whites develop similar, I didn't say exactly the same, but similar views, cognitions, racial aesthetics, and even emotions, a subject that I addressed in my 2018 American Sociological Association presidential address. I answered this question by asking some questions to whites in my audiences in the US. However, the questions apply to white Germans too. So let's play the game of answer these questions. So where do you live, and how were the neighborhoods in which you were raised? Who are your friends, and who were your friends growing up? What church or other religious institution do you attend now or attended before coming to this college or this job that you have? Were the schools you attended while growing up integrated? Who challenges your racial views nowadays or while you were growing up? And then I do a pause, and I see the audience, and they're angry. And that's where I know I better make a joke, because they're getting angry. So I can go on, but hope you see my point. I force the admission that regular white folks have been shaped and are still being shaped by this thing that I call the white habitus, this process of racial socialization that begins from birth, some people argue even before birth, till death. This fact, in combination with the effects of a racist culture and a white-oriented behavior of most whites, leads to the creation of white bread, whiteness. It's a joke, relax. Although every slice of bread is somewhat different, they all share the basic of breadness, of whiteness, yeah? Of course, per my own theorization, those of you who have read my more recent work on racism, there is variance in breadness. And that variance is very important because it can lead to ruptures and the development of white allies. Actually, even more than allies, white conspirators. Allies is a soft term. I want people who are willing to go beyond just, I support you. I'm like, no, yeah, I do want your money, but I also want you to fight and be willing to, fight till the end, yeah? So this is why, because of this variant, we have had in history people like John Brown during the slavery period who died in the fight against slavery. The many whites who joined the civil rights movement, and many of them died in the process. I don't want anyone to die, but struggles sometimes, have casualties. And the thousands of whites who joined us in the streets in the moment of the murder of George Floyd. However, there's always however, systems of domination, whether patriarchy, capitalism, or systemic racism, fundamentally work by creating a seductive normative structure that swallows people into sameness, into following the path of least resistance. Systemic racism then is systemic because it incorporates most nice white people into the game. Angry birds are not essential for racial domination to exist, as domination would then be contingent. What is essential is the production of an army of silent, liberal to moderately conservative whites who are either apathetic, yeah, I don't care, or superficially concerned about race. My goodness, they killed that black man. Hey, honey, can you pass me the popcorn? Yeah. I'm making a joke, but I saw that, yeah? And for us, people of color, the reaction, emotional and literal, wasn't the same. Because for us, that could have been me. That could have been my son, my friend, yeah? So therefore, don't pass me the popcorn. Let's talk about this, and let's do something about it, yeah? Dr. King expressed exactly what I'm saying back in the day after years of engaging in social protests, and he said, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen councilor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. After all, in general, then it's not the Klan-like white person who follows us in stores or calls 911 when they see us in their neighborhood, yeah? I own this place, it's a white neighborhood, what are you doing? I'm like, free country, I can walk wherever I want. Actually, we learned that's not the case, yeah? If it's a white neighborhood and you are there, they call the police, and the police can end up killing you, yeah? Or are the people who tell us, you cannot barbecue in this park. It's illegal, yeah? Or who tells us, happens to me all the time, hey, you're speaking Spanish, speak American. I'm like, American is not the language, you idiot. You mean English. Or who threatens to call the police if we dare tell them they cannot have dogs without a leash in Central Park. Those of you who have paying attention to the US, all these things that I mentioned are real events that happened and went viral, yeah? So racial domination is then manufactured in plain sight. That's the secret. And it's invisible to those manufactured as white. We know, we feel it, we experience it. But in their view of RWF, I'm just Megan, Jessica, Tyler, or John. And Megan, Jessica, Tyler, and John are indeed different individuals, and may indeed be good people, but they are all, borrowing from Marx, unconscious personifications of the racial order. Yeah? Like this woman, I'm a good person. I never use the N-word. I even have a black Puerto Rican friend. That's me, I guess. But I wonder, how can he be black and Puerto Rican and at the same time, where it is what it is? If you want, we can talk about why I'm black Puerto Rican, because blackness is not just a U.S. phenomenon. It's a well-systemic matter. And blackness did not begin in 1619 in the U.S. It began in the Caribbean in the early 16th century. Dominicans and Puerto Ricans fight about who had the first black person. Yeah? I think it was in Puerto Rico. So let me now conclude by addressing the critical issue of what is to be done. Let me begin with the matter of organizational racism. That is, with how systemic racism shapes organizations such as hospitals, churches, neighborhoods, or, as I mentioned today, HWCUs. If the problem in HWCUs is systemic, the solution must be to continuing doing performative diversity work, making statements, oh, George Floyd, this is horrible, and we admit that in of Hamburg, we're bad, we're going to give you $300, and $300? Get your checkbook out, man, that's not enough, yeah? Or institutions claiming that they don't discriminate and having visual representations, yeah? You go to the webpage of Duke or UNC, and they always say, hey, we need a black person. And they can do like Wisconsin did when we were in grad school. They pulled a picture of a black person and put it in a game. And the person is like, I wasn't in that game. And the office had to admit, yeah, we thought it was all white people, but we wanted to express diversity, so we pulled this person from another picture and put it. So artificially, they created diversity. Okay. So the task at hand is fostering a new climate, structure, and culture. To do this, one must seriously listen to what folks of color are saying. Folks, listen to us. If we tell you that we are unhappy and alienated, don't be telling us, why are you unhappy and alienated? You should be glad that we gave you a job and we're paying you big money. I'm like, thank you, master, but slavery is over, man. Let's talk for real. Yeah, and talking for real is that you need to ask the right question, which is, why are you dissatisfied and alienated, and what are the causes, yeah? That's the right question, rather than beginning with doubting us. Second, that was supposed to be with the first. Second, HWCUs have histories, cultures, and established practices that need revision, as they have been profoundly shaped by whiteness. This requires first acknowledging this reality and think about the colonial amnesia that Germans are suffering. Yeah, it's like, oh, we just had this. I'm like, before Hitler, you had this Namibian thing, yeah? And it's important. And you also participate of sort of imperial stuff as commerce, as practice, as imagination. So therefore, you were part of the well-systemic racial regime of modernity. Don't be like, I'm an innocent person, yeah? No one is. And you also have to then work hard to undo the organizational and cultural whiteness of your colleges. This might include removing some statues and symbols. And think about Oxford's reluctance of removing the statue of Cecil Rhodes, yeah? It will also include changing some traditions, developing a more inclusive architecture, and rethinking many things, names, etc. Third, organizations like structures are not ghosts. Racialized individuals make them what they are. Therefore, for this change to happen, whites must be willing to change themselves. This does not mean trying to become black like that white woman, yeah? So I want to be so in connection with you, I'm going to become black. Yeah, like, no, that's not cool. Definitely not. Not good. So you don't have to become black, Latino, Asian, indigenous, etc. It means that whites in the US and Europe should restructure their life, and they must work to transform it into a truly integrated, multicultural one. And please don't tell me, I'm multicultural. I eat Turkish food every day. By the way, I noticed very few historically white German restaurants these days in Germany. What's up with that? You don't like your own food? Lastly, democratizing things to make them reflect the multiracial and national realities of the US and Germany. So you're no longer what you used to be in the 1930s or 40s, yeah? Now you have a quarter and growing by the day of your population being folks of color, yeah? As you like to call them, of migrant background. At some point we have to debate how long it takes you to be just German, yeah? Because so long as you call it migrant background, you make them perpetual foreigners, yeah? So this is why throughout American history, profound changes have always necessitated social movements. Even the changes I hope to see in regular white folks will not happen on a large scale without the cleaning action of a social movement. As racial justice will not happen without struggle, I ask all of you to remember the sage words of the late congressman from Georgia, John Lewis, who said, "Never ever be afraid of making some noise and getting in good trouble, necessary trouble." Gracias, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Bonilla-Silva. This was a stimulating and insightful talk. As the time is already quite progressed, I won't ask a question, but do we already have the mic for the audience? Or is there already somebody? Yeah, I already see a question here in the front.
We need to use the mic?
Yeah, I think otherwise it's difficult for people in the back to hear.
But you heard me good in the presentation, yeah? I project my voice. It's on.
Yeah,
hello. Yeah, thank you, Professor. It was amazing. We just had an election in 2 states. AfD won big time, the right-wing extremist party. And if you look at the voting patterns, very many young people voted for them. And one of the arguments was social media. And then you look into social media and you see many people posting. And 2 are very interesting, Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate. And they're 2 sides of the same coin, I would say. How do these people who have the potential to reach even brown and black people with what they do, Andrew Tate is black, how do they complicate
the picture?
The picture, or do they seamlessly integrate into your thinking?
I'll tell you what, I wrote a paper 25 years ago. Actually, Mary, when was it? 1998. Wow, time flies. 25 years ago, the title was horrible, but you know, I was a young scholar then, trying to make it. This is a white country. Racial ideological convergence of the Western nations of the world system. And the paper came out of me reading about New Zealand, and I'm like, these New Zealand people, white folks, sound like Americans, same nonsense. And that led me to begin reading about France, Germany. So at the end of the day, I then used 4 case studies, Germany, New Zealand, England, and the US. And the argument was that the racial ideology was converging, but it was converging in a peculiar way. It was combining what I didn't even have a name then. Later on was that I coined the term colorblind racism. So it was this sort of liberal racism combined with ethno-nationalism. And that's the danger. Now, the second part of your comment about how can it affect and influence some people of color, nothing new under the sun. A dominant ideology is dominant because it affects everybody, whether we're talking about gender, class, or race. It affects them differently, so there are fewer people of color supporting Trump, for example, but you probably have heard that about 30% of Latinos supported Trump, and 9-10% of black men voted for Trump. Very few black women smart. Black men, sorry, black men, we're silly. We are like, oh, he's a man. I'm like, he's a man who's going to kick you? You idiot, you know. So The truth is that ideologies and systems move, and it's the ebb and flow of history. Yeah? So I'm not surprised by what we erratically call the populist moment. I think that populism has to be rescued because there is good economic radical populism and bad populism. So this bad racialized populism is influencing us because many of us are sort of literally listening to all the nonsense, yeah? Just before coming to the US, I was checking the news in Chicago and talking to a friend, professor of mine, former student, Tyrone Foreman, telling me that he was concerned because black folks were against all the immigrants coming to Chicago. And they were using the language of resources, yeah? Why are they taking my resources? So in that notion, they miss the point that, fool, these folks are like you. And ultimately think about what would be the US without immigrants. They do everything. They do all the jobs that none of us wants to do, yeah? And that is the double unconsciousness of white people. We hate them, except I like Rosita, who cooks my food, and Jose, who does my yard, and Pepe, who takes care of my children, and this, and I'm like, wait a second, are you for or against immigration? No, I am against the other immigrants, but my Mexicans, my Venezuelans, I love. They're hardworking people.
May I maybe introduce a question here, which was the most important question that was on my mind while listening to you. So we learned a lot about the structures of oppression and the people engaged in the structures of oppression. Is there anything, so I was asking myself, what is the role of those who are on the side of the oppressed if we stay in these like very dichotomic? Do we have to wait for like white people to change?
No. Same as women will not wait for men to be like liberating them, yeah? So the struggle for women is we organize, hopefully some men change, but if they don't, we just, step over them and move on, yeah? That's the job of the progressive feminist woman. But in the process, we hope to convince a few of the men that change needs to happen. In terms of the resistance in the US, I use a term I mentioned yesterday. I am somewhat pesoptimistic. I'll tell you why. I come out of social movement traditions in the 80s in Puerto Rico, student movement, the movement, informal settlements movements, young communists, these days people are young communists, you are ideological, and whatever. The working class is the largest segment, so we have to work with them, period. Take it. Okay, so I believe in the need of organization. And some of the new movements that we all have seen since the Arab Spring, remember the Arab Spring a few years ago, are more amorphous. And the beauty is that they organize quickly. They just post something, hey, meet at 10 p.m. in Charlie's Point. Yeah, and everybody, okay, all of a sudden, 100,000 people there. The problem with that strategy is that those movements tend to collapse rather quickly. They don't ask specific demands, or they're less likely to ask specific demands, and they don't train leaders. And of course, they claim, we don't need leaders. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm getting old, but I think leaders matter. Of course, I want to have plural leaders. I don't want to have the traditional black male leader. I want everybody to be part of the leadership possibilities, and I want rotations, yeah? So my pesoptimism is that we saw the George Floyd moment, important moment in the world system. Everywhere in the world, people organize rebellions, and what happened 2 years later? Regression to whiteness as usual. And the $300 they offered us at Hamburg University are now like, hey, what are the three? I wanted more, but where are the $300? What? I don't remember that. So the issue for us, and now the optimistic side is this. History has shown us that we as social analysts, we as social scientists are very limited in our predictions on movements. Movements have the capacity to emerge out of nowhere. That's part of the history. And we are so caught up with our research, I'm like, wait, don't organize until I take notes and do my ethnographic work, And that's not the way things happen.
I've seen one more question, and maybe we take a second one, and then we already have to close for the evening. The time already moved on. So, Peggy, and who wants to ask the second question? Please.
Yes, thank you very much for your very insightful talk, and especially also to make the transnational connection. I have a quick question. So what happened to the more money for the diversity hire? Did you get the money? The reason I'm asking, or the real question I want to ask is, what would you think are the pitfalls we should look out for as we are now trying to make the step to institutionalize racism research in Germany? And of course, what we discussed today is that we don't start at one day, but are also in a tradition, and the risk of losing that, or what it means to bring that now to this new phase. And we know about the waves in the US. So from your experience and also with connection, what are the...
What should you... Yeah, okay.
Let's collect the questions.
Okay.
We take the second one.
Also, we have to... okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to start by thanking Professor Bonilla-Silva for this very concise, I'm going to say blueprint, but a way to understand the pattern of the mundane, and about how folks are invested in upholding the benefit system of racism. So that's actually my main point. And what I want to ask is more about also Peggy's direction with the question of institutions. So we are trying to dismantle the mundane, which to me means that we need routines. So a lot of things we're going to do on a daily basis. So I'd like to ask more about what kind of practices are we looking at. You've said that the strategies with no specific demands, and also that are not organized around very strongly cohesive causes are going to fall. So I was going to ask if you can just expand a little bit more on what that routine would be to fight the mundane.
Okay, good. I'll try to be concise. I didn't get more money, but I'm still waiting. Keep hope alive. On the institutionalization of, I'm thinking of Germany, but I'm from Puerto Rico, where we're also way behind, yeah? We are the inventors of color blindness, yeah? We don't call it color blindness, but we have the racial democracy myth. The argument, we're all Puerto Ricans. I'm like, but I don't see black Puerto Ricans as doctors, bankers, in politics, or in the university. I'm like, we don't have black Puerto Ricans, we have Puerto Ricans. And by the way, everybody's mixed, therefore, you are represented. I'm like, it doesn't compute. People with my skin tone don't look, anyway. So what I think needs to happen in the academy, I'm going to limit to the academy, then expand to other areas, is that use this moment that is dissipating rather quickly, yeah? So you don't know how much longer you'll have it, to press forward the development of programs and departments. In the academy, if you only make the mistake of saying something like we did in the 1980s, requiring mandatory ethnic and race studies courses, and they accepted, and I was like, we won. You know what they did? They checked the courses they had in place, and they are like, there is a course on Greek history, that's ethnic. There is a course on Slavic history, that's ethnic. In mind, we had courses addressing the racially oppressed experiences of Latinos, specifically Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans, Native folks, blacks, Asian Americans. That was not done. And our idea was, in order for you to do that, you need to bring faculty of color or white faculty that are doing the work. They didn't do anything because they just took the same courses in place. Therefore, academically, and I know it's a hard struggle, but I hope the center can push in an elegant, innovative, creative, articulated, beautiful way for a policy suggestion about the need for centers, programs, yeah, on on race studies, and that cannot happen until you target new hires in the area of race and ethnic relations, yeah? So don't allow them to just tell them, okay, let me get this person who taught a course on Slavic history to teach the course on racism in German history. No, you need to have people who are experts in the subject, and that means creating not just the positions, but the structures, yeah? On the larger question of the institutionalization of plans of action and behavior against the new racial order, I am of the mind that the fundamental thing we need is re-articulate movements, yeah? Again, I already said I am old-fashioned in this, and it's not that I don't believe in the creativity of young people, yeah? I love all the, like all my students, Professor, do you tweet? I'm like, tweet. I don't tweet. Do you Facebook? I used to, and I stopped. It's crazy, yeah? Because they tell you, oh, Professor, if you want to tweet or Facebook, you have to be every day. I'm like, I don't do anything every day. So forget about that. Next. Yeah? So I think it's important for us to revitalize movements. Those movements will have to find their own new strategies. So I'm not stuck in the 60s or 70s or 80s. I believe that literally the music of the new movement and the politics of the new movement will be the politics of young people. I'm all for that. But young people may learn a bit from old people, yeah? There are things in historical movements that should be transmitted and continued, yeah? Organization pays. Have specific demands. I already told you in the university, if you say, we need multiculturalism, oh, I'll give you multiculturalism. Hey, bring the Turkish food and some Vietnamese on the side, and that's it. That's not what we want. We have to be very specific because dominant actors can take our demands and co-opt them and spit them back at us as this is what I mean by multicultural. So you have to be very specific and political. On larger issues, and I don't know if your question was about other areas of life, I think that I'm always thinking about I'm Puerto Rican, I'll die Puerto Rican, love Puerto Rico. How many of you have been in Puerto Rico? Any Puerto Rican in the audience besides me? I'll make you all honorary Puerto Rican for tonight if you pay me a beer after. Anyway, no, I'm not kidding. I stopped drinking. No, I'm still drinking. Anyway, so what you need to do is incorporate these demands with social movements and think about specific demands, specific policies that are anti-system. And the problem that you face, and that's why I went to Puerto Rico, is that you don't have the systematic studies to put together a coherent plan. So think about housing segregation. In the US, I can tell you exactly how it happens, yeah? So we have empirical studies, we have the data. I can tell you people of color, blacks, Latinos are significantly less likely to be in these residential areas, and I can tell you how that happens. Realtors steer people. So I go to get a house, and they tell me, oh, you want a house? Let me take you. And they take me to one particular neighborhood. They'll never take me to the white neighborhood. The same thing with whites, yeah? In Puerto Rico or in Germany, you will not have the data on that because that's part of the drama of the colorblind society. We don't measure things. We may not have the data. In Puerto Rico, for example, we are US. Think about that. We are US, a colony, but we are technically US. For 50 years, we removed the race question from the census. 50 years. Which meant 50 years, I cannot tell them, black Puerto Ricans earn 50% less than whites, are less likely to be in these jobs, have less wealth, have less anything, less education. By the way, the question was reintroduced in 2000. Guess how many Puerto Ricans claim white? 84%. We're whiter than white Americans, yeah? Because the options were, are you white, black, or other? And like these other things, I could be other, but no. Black, nope, I'm white. because the census used the US categories of life rather than the Puerto Rican categories of race, which are 3 categories: white, black, and the in-between category, the brown category that in Puerto Rico is called trigueño, which comes from the word trigo, which means wheat, brown people. And brown people can be really dark or really light. Most Puerto Ricans say, I'm just mixed. And you push them, I'm sort of white, but mixed, but white, really. Okay.
This is an interesting way to end this evening. So those of you who, I don't know, enjoy a little awkwardness can stay with the, what was the word?
Trigueño.
Trigueño. And those of you who want to leave the room with on a more serious note can maybe just rewind and go back to this idea of organization. And I feel it's also important to keep this in mind, because so many times it is told the solution is education. And I had a little brush this year with anti-discrimination work in the corporate world, where you actually can get pretty rich if you do that. I didn't get rich. I was trained in anti-discrimination.
No, she got paid.
No, I didn't get paid. But so what you really can learn there, that education is really, I mean, can be just another smokescreen. So organization. Is what will actually change things over time. Thank you so much for being here with us, Professor Bonilla-Silva. Thank you so much for your attention, even 15 minutes longer than originally intended. Thanks once more to the organizer for doing all this together for us, for society. And I don't know, is anybody coming up here from the organizing team to, or, yeah.
Thank you so much, dear Eduardo. Thank you so much, Professor Koloma Beck. And vielen Dank. Thank you so much to the audience who has been here with us since morning. Some of you were already before 9:30 here. I'm so thankful for your patience, for your attendance. And now I welcome you to the Empfang. What is Empfang? Reception. My brain is fried too now. So I welcome you to the reception. Thank you so much. And see you tomorrow by 9:30. Thank you.
My computer.
I have it with me.